Buy your stock now. Danny Sprinkle's building the monster.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And Lars, we're recording this shortly after we talked about the newest Husky, Great Osobor, and we wanted to expand on that a little bit because Danny Sprinkle's building something special here through the transfer portal, and that's the short term, but all of this bodes really, really well for what he could be in the future too, as especially what we've seen with the resources of getting Great Osobor.
Yeah, and that's the one thing we knew with this hire, where we talked about even before he took the job. That's why you go and spend the money. You were given a gift of a buyout from Alabama. Use that gift and restore a program that was once a proud program that was making consistent tournament runs, has significant legacy in the now.
I'm sorry. I want to stop you really quickly there, just because you're absolutely right. But I want you to just expand on that a little bit because of the football buyout going towards all of athletics. So the everydayers are just like, wait, hold on. I thought football had to stay with football, which certainly would make sense.
It would, but when you have the situation that the Washington basketball program was in, where, what was it, 5 straight seasons without a tournament appearance, 6, somewhere in that ball. At this point, that was the problem. Was it wasn't even just making an NCAA tournament; it was making the postseason. It was. Now I understand sometimes teams decide to reject invites and things like that, but even the fact that a once proud program was so far down the drain under a nice guy, but just wasn't a good coach in Mike Hopkins, you have to invest the money where it came from. So Alabama pays the buyout for Kalen DeBoer. Part of that money does go to Jedd Fisch to, buy him out from his situation in Arizona, but they still had, I believe, $5 to $7 million left over from that buyout. And Danny Sprinkle's buyout at Utah State was around 3 to 5. I don't know exactly. I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but the point is that allowed you to go get a coach like that who was just in his first season at Utah State, where if you play the money ball game and say, hey, we're just going to try and go stick with, no offense, Will Conroy or some other lower level, cheaper coach without that buyout. And, 2 years from now, if, Kentucky doesn't, is looking for another coach again, or some of the other Blue Bloods are looking for a coach, Danny Sprinkle is going to be at the top of that list. So that's why getting him now is so important. And this is one of those results where you get one of his, if not his best player at Utah State in Great Osobor to complete, for the most part, I guess, depending on if they have one more spot or not, but completes the roster and really gives them a true rounded out team, where when we look at years past, that wasn't the case. So it's about investing. And that's why Danny Sprinkle came to Washington, where he knew he was going to have the resources. He was going to have investment in NIL, the investment from the athletic department to say, go do what you need to do, get the coaches that you need to get to build a consistent winner at Washington, because the school is starving for one. And the football program showed, when you win, they'll come. And honestly, even the Gonzaga game showed, now granted it was probably 60-40 Gonzaga fans, if we're being 70-30 if we're being real, but you're able to sell enough tickets to where it's a packed house. It's an event. It's not just great. It's 8 p.m. on the Pac-12 network against Northwestern Directional State, as Jimmy Lake would say. There was no reason for a family of 4 to come out to a game, albeit maybe if it's cheap tickets, but the atmosphere wasn't the same. So it really does feel like Danny Sprinkle is truly building something and investing in Washington after Washington invested so much in him.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the big things about this move to the Big Ten, where there's going to be that added just competitiveness, that added energy that I'm personally really excited about. But one of the reasons I wanted to make sure we talked about this was just the way he's been recruiting. He's done a really good job of going and finding talented players who fit his system really well, which is something we talked about on our little bonus show, which was all about Great Osobor. So you definitely have to go check that out if you haven't yet. But one of the promising things about this is going forward with knowing how well his offense functioned over his time at Montana State and Utah State, and just seeing that he can recruit at a high level in the transfer portal. He can go get a top 100 guy in Jace Butler while retaining a top 50 guy in Zoom Diallo. Seeing all those things just says, okay, these are all the signs of somebody who can succeed at this level. And I'm not going to be shy about it. I think this can be a really, really good team this year. I think they could be one of the better rosters in the Big Ten. I think that they could certainly make some waves in the conference and probably get back to the NCAA tournament. I'm not going to be shy about that. I'm going to stand out on that ledge, and you're not going to be able to push me off it just for the foreseeable future. And one of the reasons that, again, I know I keep saying the same thing, but one of the reasons I wanted to say that is all of these things are falling into place just right. And that's something where early on in Mike Hopkins' career, they were. And we saw him, go out and win Pac-12 Coach of the Year in his first 2 seasons. Granted, a lot of those weren't his guys, but he did it. And then coming off of that, he says, okay, I'm going to go get Quade Green, a 5-star transfer from Kentucky. I'm going to go get Isaiah Stewart. I'm going to get Jaden McDaniels. We know that didn't work out. But Husky fans were excited about that nonetheless. They were excited about, okay, there's all this potential here. And combining what we've seen from Danny Sprinkle in the past with the guys that he's bringing in, I think this truly could be a top 25 team in the country.
It could, but the other thing, as you're saying that and detailing the history so well, is because all of those 3 guys were one and dones.
Yeah,
Great Osobor will be a one and done in the sense of he's a senior, so there's no reason for him to come back for a 5th year, grad year, whatever you want to call it. But at the same point, you do have freshmen that are going to stay probably 1, 2, 3 years in the program. You're bringing in a junior in Mehki Mason who probably stays for 2 years. You had Wilhelm Bredenbrock in the program for 2 years. So you're building stability. You're not just going and getting 1-year rentals. You're not going, no offense, taking the Mike Hopkins route where, yeah, there's something to be said for having a veteran team. But if you have a veteran team of guys who can't really play cohesively and consistently, there's no point in doing it. So if you the way Danny Sprinkle is building this is what I like, because there's all different types of players too, where we look at all the guards, which is the one thing this team had a lot of last season, but then you look up the roster, it's, oh wow, you have almost the same number of forwards, and you have an equal a half amount of centers in terms of you have Franck Kepnang, you have the Oregon State transfer, Casey Ebekwe, and you have depth, at in the front court as well, which is something they didn't have last season. And so it's not just going and getting the star like an Isaiah Stewart and Jaden McDaniels, a great Osobor. It's having all those other pieces around him, and that's why, as again, to say, repeat myself what I said on the live show, that's why you go and build the roster out first, and you don't just go and say, hey, I'm going to go get great. I'm going to see who else wants to be great with him and go, the Deion Sanders promo, really try and sell Great Osobor. Great Osobor is flat out being rewarded, took his time, saw every other school first, and then said, okay, Washington, now I know you got Sprinkle. What else do you have? And how is this actually going to work? And some people will say, well, he chased the bag, but it's not a bag chasing situation as we explained in the live show. So if you haven't checked that out, please do, because this is not that case of, it's not a pay for play. It's a long-term investment over the course of how UW usually breaks out their deals. So there's also plenty of other deals that you can have separate in terms of where we saw Mike Penix have, an Alaska Airlines deal at some point, the Sharpie deal towards the end of his time and things like that, where because he's already older, you're not worried about him saying, oh, it's a freshman or sophomore getting all this money. It's no. He worked the last 3 years in the Big Sky and in the Mountain West to finally get on the big stage in the Big Ten and really show how great of a player he is.
Absolutely. Lars, with that being said, there's still some needs in the football portal as well. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at LinkedIn, because when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has tools to help find all the right professionals for your team faster and for free, because LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role in any given month. Over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a quality qualified candidate within 24 hours. You can hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. And that's why LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the hiring process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockdowncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockdowncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So, Lars, we got to switch gears to football here as well, because we've seen Danny Sprinkle do very, very well in the transfer portal. And Washington, while they've brought in a lot of pieces and a couple of really talented ones, I might add, there's still a lot of work to do on the roster, especially along the offensive line. So Washington right now, it looks like there are 5 outstanding scholarships, and at least 2 of those should go to offensive linemen, especially after the Deshaun Lynch commitment, which is something we detailed on our Monday show, where I would say at least two need to go to an offensive lineman, 1 to a quarterback for sure, and that leaves 2 other bodies. I really want to see one of them go to Arizona State wide receiver Elijah Badger, and I'll definitely get more into that in a minute. But if you had one, or just, I'm going to give you the last 2, where those 2 scholarship spots, where would you want to see them allocated?
Interesting. Yeah, there's a number of positions you could probably look at, but again, I would almost say a 3rd offensive lineman. Just there's no reason, if anything else, because when you think about the 2, if you're running with the 2 principal, you're still looking for a starting left tackle, because Chris Adams is not coming, so you still and Nick Ramahi is not going to play tackle, despite what he may or may not be listed at on certain outlets and what he's been certainly reported playing at. So you have D'Angelo Titiali, who's a guard, center guard. And the more you think about it, who is that left tackle that's going to bring it? So you're looking for a left tackle. You're probably looking for some center depth as well, or right guard depth. You could go even right tackle depth, another tackle, which I think is why that 3rd one will probably be. There's going to be a younger one.
Okay.
And then there will be 2 veterans, where I would imagine you'll probably get somebody with 3 or 4 years left to play, maybe 2-3 years left to play, and then 2 more, either I'm not saying JUCO, but I'm just saying guys with 1 to 2 years left, ideally looking at this coming fall, saying, I'm trying to use this as my 1 year, and if need be, I can come back for a 5th year, but I'm really looking to be a plug and play guy. But again, as we detailed, and I wrote about it on Athlon Sports, there's the portal lineman that I found 5.
Yeah.
And so go check that out. I for what it's worth, there is actually an interesting backstory on Breon Ramsey Brooks, the viral offensive lineman from TCU, who made waves for being 6'8", 450 pounds,
450, yeah.
So you know who? Just real backstory on that, because again, this is the type of player that you're also going to be looking at for those long-term things. One of the first offers that Jedd Fisch made at Arizona was to Ramsey Brooks.
I did not know that.
So that came up in the sorry about that, the research for the story. So there are plenty of portal linemen out there. It's good that the coaching staff is doing their due diligence, but the longer publicly they don't have those linemen, the more the criticism becomes warranted, because until you don't have when you had Chris Adams, okay, it wasn't necessarily the ideal fit in terms of not a Power 5 starter, but okay, he's had starting experience, coming back, looks like he can line up at left tackle. Now that you don't have that, Vamahi is a good addition, but you still need tackles. And so to me, you're probably looking at tackles and then a interior depth piece, 3-4 years left.
Sure. So I absolutely see where you're coming from there. And I like that a lot, where absolutely one guy that, I was certainly just really curious about was Bruno Fina, who's at UCLA, and something where his dad was a really good player at Arizona back in the day. He committed to Duke, and Lars, as you kindly mentioned to me. And that's something where it was a player where he's somebody that I didn't love the advanced numbers. The Pro Football Focus numbers weren't great. And I know there are people who are saying that about Chris Adams as well. And it's something where I feel this staff is very confident in their ability to coach these guys up and just say, all right, he's got experience. He's, got a couple of years under his belt. There are certain things that we can work with there. And it's just a matter of, as you said, Lars, it's getting a little frustrating for a lot of fans to see, oh, well, there's still no starting left tackle. I get it. There's still, Enoch Vamahi might be the starting right guard. I can certainly see a world where that happens, but you want to make sure there's veteran depth. And if you take 2 tackles and just say, all right, we're going to let you compete there and then see what happens and just figure out different ways around that. I don't hate that at all. And that's the position that needs to be in. But I also want to take a second here to talk about Elijah Badger, because taking Kevin Green shouldn't discount getting Elijah Badger, because I think Green is talented. I think he can fill a specific role for the team this year, and it can still do some growing where, he was definitely slated to have a much bigger role at Arizona this season, but wanted to follow Kevin Cummings, wanted to follow Jedd Fisch. And getting Elijah Badger makes this offense just so much more exciting to watch. And I feel like that's really saying something, because it's already really fun. It's already a really talented group. And if you add just that extra wide receiver, you've got Giles Jackson, Rashid Williams is somebody I wrote about over on Huskies Wire the other day, where you already have a really nice, talented, deep group of receivers. And this just makes it a little bit easier on the offensive line as well, where if you have three guys that are just such threats that can get open really, really quickly, and it doesn't mean you can't take more offensive linemen, because you certainly need to, but getting a guy like that in the room would discount some of those problems and just make it a little bit harder on teams to blitz or to sell out to stop certain things, knowing that there's Denzel Boston, Jeremiah Hunter, and Elijah Badger to cover.
Yeah, and the ironic part is, do you know who was one of his teammates at Folsom?
Wasn't it Daniel Ngata?
Daniel Ngata. And Daniel Ngata. Yeah. So they all three played together. I believe Lynch only played with him for 1 year. I could be wrong. Maybe it was 2. But I know for a fact it was 1 year. Because, doing research for various stories and things like that, I came across that. I was like, oh, interesting. Did not know that. So there was an appeal there. That said, because he did visit was it for the spring game, or was it in early May?
It was before the spring game. It was a week or two before that.
Okay, I was going to say, because it seems like it's been a while since they've, had him on campus. He, I believe, was reportedly looking at Colorado and Florida. Arizona was, I believe, in that mix somewhere as well. So, and I don't know if that was a petty visit on Arizona staff's behalf, or just because he wanted to take a visit, or there's genuine interest. Who knows? But he hasn't committed anywhere. It doesn't seem like he's necessarily in a rush to make a decision, which does kind of go both ways for Washington, because, as you mentioned, you're just looking for that final piece on offense. You're looking for, in terms of skill positions and things like that. You got Jordan Washington, already got Muhammad Coleman. The running backs are fine. The running back's not the issue. Yeah. You got Kevin Green as a
depth piece.
As an emerging sophomore deputy. It's similar to what I wanted from Jeremy Bernard. But now this one is like what Jeremy Bernard would have been
this season.
This season, where you're looking for an instant impact, and he had that at Folsom. 20 touchdowns in 2 consecutive seasons. Just an electric guy that you could also throw out there as a mismatch guy. The problem that I kind of wrestle with, and this isn't because they're necessarily the same player, but you do already have Giles Jackson. So if I'm Giles and I'm saying, okay, like I know Rashid got a decent amount of first team reps, does that mean he's now really more in that second wave and you're talking about running a 4 wide? I'm just more, because I don't disagree that he would be a great addition. Yeah. But when you think about the other guys in that room, like Giles and then Keith Reynolds' development and things like that, I'm not saying it would preclude it, but obviously with them wanting to play freshmen and younger players, you got to pick a side there.
So I certainly see where you're coming from, and I don't disagree with that at all. But it's just a matter of something Jedd Fisch said, where we're not going to turn down talent. And you get as much talent as you possibly can in the room and let it figure itself out from there. And that's what this take would be, where it would also just send a really nice message, where that certainly fills out the position. You certainly don't need to do any more adding there. But I think the one person who it would affect more than it would Giles Jackson would be a Rashid Williams, where all of a sudden Giles becomes the 4, and Rashid, who I really like, and I know you're super high on him as well. He had a really nice spring, and it pushes him from that 4th wide receiver role, where I think he is right now, down to number 5. And that gets really hard, where, that's something we saw this past season, where Jeremy was in the 4th role when everybody was healthy, and it was Giles Jackson at 5 or Denzel Boston at 5, depending on just how everything else looked. And that player didn't get a ton of run, but that's something that you're willing to sacrifice with Rashid, I would assume, where you look at it from the standpoint of, we still have 3 more years to work with this guy. We know he was really impressive, because it's in a similar sense what happened with Denzel Boston, where you look at him and you say, all right, yeah, we know we still have, when you look at him coming in 2023, we know we still have 4 years with this guy to work with. And we're comfortable knowing who's in front of him, where he's certainly going to get his opportunities. And that's what you could say about Rashid Williams, where it's okay, Giles Jackson's in front of him, Elijah Badger's in front of him, but we know both those guys are gone after the year. Jeremiah Hunter's probably also gone after the year. Denzel, we'll see, where 2 years, and I think he could certainly be a very high NFL draft pick. But all of a sudden in 2025, because it's planning for the future, all of a sudden there's a whole lot of opportunities for him, and he just needs to be patient. He can continue working with Damon Williams, which is something he did a whole lot of during spring camp. And I just think that there's a solid path there if they want it. And Lars, with that being said, you're talking a little bit about some high school stats. Who do you think is going to be the next high school recruit coming to Washington? So, Lars, we're going to have a lot of fun on this segment, where one guy that I'm really curious about, and just the person who inspired this segment, is somebody I wrote about over on Huskies Wire a week or two ago, and that's running back Jordan Thomas, who said he's going to be announcing his commitment on Wednesday. That's somebody I wouldn't rule Washington out of that mix. They already have a 2025 running back commit in Julian McMahon, but I wouldn't be surprised if Washington took two, assuming a couple of guys might move on after the year, after Will Nixon left the program. Daniel Ngata is going to be out of eligibility this year. Sam Adams, we'll see what happens with that as well. So there's certainly availability for two running backs. So that's just a name to keep an eye on over the next couple of days. He's going to be announcing on Wednesday morning. But we wanted to have some fun. And as all the everydayers know, we love bold predictions here on Locked On Huskies. So we're going to get extra bold and we're going to go with who will Washington's next high school commit be. Lars, you have the floor.
So it's a both massive and spicy prediction.
Ooh.
So, it's I don't know what it is on the what is it, Scoville meter, right? The hot sauce.
Yep.
Is that what it is? But I told you this off the air because I genuinely think this happens, and I wanted to verify that again at this point. Douglas Uchu has not scheduled any other official visits since his official visit to Washington. And I will repeat this until he decides to either go elsewhere or becomes a Husky. When you make Vita Vea look average, and I mean that with absolutely no disrespect to Vita in any way, shape, or form, because again, as somebody who looks up to Vita in every single potential way here, I'm not one to talk. But when I saw that photo of those two guys, and I saw them talking on the sideline during the spring game, that was just to me a moment where I'm like, wow, yeah, that you really might have something. And then you look at his right, and he comes from a great high school in Bishop Gorman, which I talked to somebody about that, where Washington quietly is basically building a pipeline from Gorman, where it's Roman Dunze gets to go as a first round pick, number 9 overall, and really, and then you got Eddie Lofosio going to Buffalo, continuing on that. Build that Bishop Gorman pipeline a little bit more. Yeah. Bishop Gorman's a school that Washington has recruited a decent amount of over the years. When you can have the opportunity to get a top 100 prospect, the top and a top 5 offensive, what is it? I believe he's like
top 5 offensive line. Yeah, that's correct.
Well, but in terms of, I believe he's listed as an interior.
You're right. He is, but I certainly think he can play tackle if need be.
And so I just wanted to clarify that he could be a top 5 tackle or guard. I just didn't want to misrepresent what the rating would say. But with that being said, when you already have a guy like Jake Flores in the class, adding Douglas Uchu would, no pun intended, be massive. It really allows you to have even more flexibility, but it also gives Brennan Carroll that signature first victory and Jedd Fisch to a degree as well, where you can get quarterbacks, you can get skill players. Raiden Vinesbrett's a great addition out of IMG, originally from on the West Coast. But getting really coveted offensive linemen who also don't want to shop themselves around, and they're perfectly content to just take one official visit. And while everybody else in the country seems to be going 4, 5, 6 schools deep, Douglas Uchu has made it pretty clear Washington's potentially kind of where he wants to end up.
Yeah. I like where you're going with that, because I also chose an offensive lineman, but I chose John Mills, a 3-star from St. Ignatius Prep down in the Bay Area. And this is somebody who, you talk about just making Vita Vea look small. He wasn't on campus for the spring game, but John Mills was on campus for a Saturday practice a couple of weeks ago. And he was somebody who I remember, we're all standing there watching practice on the other sideline, and we just see this one dude who's like a head taller than everybody else, long blonde hair. Who's that over there? We pull up the list of guys we heard were coming. Oh, that's 1,000% John Mills, 6'6", 330, somebody who you look at him and just say, okay, that dude is 100% going to play tackle. And I love his film. He's one of the more coveted offensive line prospects on the West Coast, where he's got visits up to Texas, to USC. And he's one guy who I'm going to be keeping a really close eye on, because I think Washington is right there at the top of the list for him, which is a really good sign, because it wasn't just something where Jedd Fisch and Brandon Carroll came in and started pushing really hard for him. Scott Huff was really high on this guy too. Scott Huff was definitely, he was somebody that I think Scott Huff would have tried to bring in as well as one of his top targets in this class. And he's the more I watch his film, the more impressed I am by him, I'm really glad truly that we both chose offensive linemen, because that's such an important part of this class, where I think the offense and defense both really need a whole bunch of bodies. We know this is going to be a 20-plus person class, and the offensive line is going to be critical to that, where we look at the receivers and we say, okay, we know they're going to get some big time guys, whether Andrew Marsh does decide to commit, or whether it's Chris Lawson or Phillip Bell or some of these other guys, or Donovan Olugbudi, whoever it ends up being that rounds out the wide receiver room. We know that it's going to be talented. And you could say the same thing about basically every position with the guys that they're in on. And now it's just a matter of closing. But just in terms of when we look at the roster right now, offensive line is just miles and miles away the biggest need. And getting guys like Douglas Utu and John Mills would certainly close that gap.
And it's worth also acknowledging the problem with the offensive line right now is seniority and veteran experience. Yeah. It's not, the future is, I think we both like, Elijah Duquette, if you can fill that a little more, and Siano Fasola, and Kaylee Tafai, and obviously Landon Hatchett when he's healthy, and Gard Memolar when he's healthy. Certainly, there's a lot of long-term options there. But in that same regard, that's a position where we've seen, and Scott Huff was a perfect example of this, where, yeah, you can have a great offensive line class one year, 2020, but you also still need that in 2018, 2019, and 2021, and 2022. You need to still continue to keep maintaining that level. You don't want to have those lulls where, okay, yeah, even if you got to take a smaller class, which isn't the case this year, you still want to be making sure you're getting that marquee talent. And that's why, whether it's John Mills, even though he's a 3-star, or Douglas Utu is a 4-star, all of these guys, John Mills is probably going to end up as a 4-star at the end of the day. I would,
he should be.
If he doesn't, he's going to play himself and draft himself into what should have been a 4-star prospect. Let me put it that way. So at the end of the day, those are the players that they're identifying. Those are the players that they want to get in the boat. And now when you're getting them on campus, those are the players that they're receptive to your pitch. The only problem I think for Jedd is going to be, he's got to do it at Washington. And I think almost like what Kalen DeBoer had at Washington, where when guys, nobody knew, let's be real, like so many of the recruits that ended up signing and a lot of the talented, players that transferred in didn't really know Kalen DeBoer from his time in Fresno State. And that's no disrespect to Kalen, but it was similar to Ryan Grubb. We're like in the business, right? In our circles, right? Oh, hey, Ryan Grubb's a guy he might be an up-and-comer, similar to what Kirby Moore was a couple of years ago, where, hey, Kirby's going to be a guy to watch. Like, he's going to rise pretty quickly here. But then you kind of also have to replicate that at Washington. And when Jedd is able to do that, if he's able to get, 8-9 wins, that'll be even future investment for those 26 guys and down the road where, oh, okay, these big 4-stars and these legitimate players want to come play for Washington and they're buying in at the 8-win mark. I only wonder what it could be at the 10, 11, 12-win mark in a couple of years if I were to also join in. So I think it's a domino effect as well, and it starts with 2025.
So I certainly like where you're going there, and that's why I want to close this out with one more prediction. I've got a bold one, and this one certainly might surprise some people. I know there are a lot of people who've been watching his recruitment very closely, and to those it might not be as much of a surprise, but I'm going to put it in a crystal ball and say I think 4-star safety Ladarian Clardy commits to Washington as well, where this is somebody I've been really, really impressed with watching Vinny Sunseri recruit, where he's somebody who's built up a truly just deep relationship with a lot of these high-end commits really, really quickly. Like, I don't think Anquan Fagan schedules an official visit to Washington without a deep relationship with Vinny Sunseri. You could say the exact same thing about Ladarian Clardy, and he said as much himself, where there are a lot of guys like Elijah Pratt, who's currently committed to SMU. The list goes on of guys that Vinny Sunseri has developed a relationship with, and it feels like Ladarian Clardy has kind of put himself at, and if not number one, he's number two behind Fagans in terms of guys that are visiting that I think that Vinny Sunseri really wants to reel in. So that's a name I'm going to be keeping an eye on very, very closely. I love his film. I highly recommend any everydayer who really is into recruiting goes and watches that immediately, because it's truly something special. And Lars, with that being said, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We've got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the off season, as we're going to have a whole lot of recruiting stuff like this, some bonus pods for commitments, and so much more. If you have any ideas for us, hey, we'd love to hear it. Just drop it right down here in the YouTube comment section. And with that being said, make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel through content every single day. So please make sure you click that like on the video, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. And like I said, leave a comment down below if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it all really does help us out. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday.